All right, so welcome back, everybody. This is Jerry, and today I have Michael Bahry on the podcast. Michael, in the 7 years, has earned two graduate degrees from Providence College, one in theology, early church history, and the other one in biblical studies. He graduated with distinction in both programs, and he is currently an adjunct instructor at Salva Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island. Welcome, Michael. Sorry, I probably mispronounced some of these words, but welcome
That's
to the
okay.
podcast.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you obviously have gone through college, through graduate school, have good wisdom, good kind of knowledge behind you today. Um, but how did you get to this point? If we can just like delve into or jump into your life in terms of kind of from your early upbringing and all the way through to here. So like in your early upbringings, who were you like back then?
Well, when I was younger, I was kind of obsessed with sports. That was my focus. And when it came time to go to college, I had a scholarship to URI, who had a pretty good wrestling program then, and it just wasn't a fit for me. So I ended up leaving after about 5 weeks and started working in the construction industry and didn't start going back to college at night until about 5 years after I graduated from high school.
Okay.
When I did that, it was the same year I got married, and 5 years later, I had the degree and two kids. So my goal was to be a school teacher. I wanted to teach theology and history, but um, I really couldn't afford it at the time. I wanted my wife to stay home, so I stayed in the construction business and in the trade for another 5 years after we were married, and um, eventually was able to get into the administrative side of things.
Okay. But
Actually, at Providence College.
yeah, if we could kind of stay a little bit during your early years, like middle school and high school, as far as your personality and kind of the people you were around or kind of um, closer to, who were you like earlier on when you were younger?
Well, it was really all kind of obsessed with sports, and obsessed with my family. I love my family. I have three sisters and a brother, and we're all very close. But early on in my life, really, it was just obsessing over sports. I played football and wrestled, and that was really who I was. I did okay in school, but I really just dreamed of being a professional football player, and then I dreamed of being an Olympic wrestler. And when I got to college, it just wasn't a fit. So
Hmm. What did
I
you
ended
play?
up.
What position did you play in football?
I played middle linebacker, and I played guard
Okay.
on offense, and it was a great experience. It was like having another family.
Hmm.
We were very close. We won the state championship my senior year, which was like the greatest thing. And
Yeah.
and I wrestled all the time I was in high school.
Did you play any other sports?
Those were the two I did in high school. I played baseball when I was younger, but I really became obsessed with wrestling because that's the thing I was better at because of my size. I'm not huge. So professional football kind of faded away in my mind,
Hmm.
like a lot of kids when they realize how they're not big enough or fast enough. So wrestling was okay, and I did pretty well at that.
And when you went to college afterwards, you said that sports wasn't really a thing for you after that. Like, why? What was the reason for it?
I think what I get interested in is what I end up focusing on. So when I was in construction, I focused on construction quite a bit. And when I went back to school at night, I really focused on my studies. I really wanted to be a theology and a history teacher even back then.
Hmm.
But that got put on hold for years until 8 years ago or 7 years ago. Actually, it's about 8 years ago now when I
Okay.
decided I had been doing construction long enough. I really wanted to do theology and history, so I went back to school.
Okay. And during that time when you were transitioning from high school to college, what what was your thought process like in terms of what you wanted to do with your life? Did you have a goal? Like you mentioned, you wanted to be a teacher and kind of go to school for theology. Was that always on your mind back then, or did you have any kind of guidance from other people in terms of what you should do or what path you should take?
No, when I decided to do theology was in 1985 after I had been in the construction industry for a while. So I would just say my faith became a big part of my life. I had a real experience with God's love in Jesus, and that's really what kind of got me interested in theology and going back to school. In fact, the first class I completed was basic Catholicism, and it was just great to have one college class behind me. Excuse me.
Hmm. So during that time from high school to college, did you actually go to college right after high school, or did you go into the trades right away?
No, I went to URI on a wrestling scholarship. They were very good back then. I did pretty good in high school wrestling, and
Hmm.
so I earned a scholarship. But when I got there, I didn't really want to do it anymore. I was lost as far as academics. I had no real direction on what I wanted to get a degree in, so I ended up leaving. I missed my mother too. I tell everybody that because, it's kind of the truth. I just miss being home. I was homesick. So,
Okay, so you went. It was not even like one semester, and you left.
yeah, it was like I told everyone I was on like a 5 or 6 week program, and that's once I finished the 6 weeks, I was done,
Okay.
and just started working in construction and was a carpenter. Was in the carpenters union for almost 7 years, and in the trade for 10 years before I went into management at Providence College after I got my degree.
Okay. How did your path into carpentry, how did you end up being a carpenter? Did you have friends or somebody that like got you into that?
Yeah, my dad owned a small kind of residential slash commercial construction company, and I worked for him when I was younger in high school. So it was kind of a natural fit. A lot of athletes, I think, end up in construction. It's physical in a lot of ways, so it's kind of a fit.
Hmm.
And it was a fit for me for a long time.
Did you just work for your dad, or did you like start your own construction or contracting business?
Back then, I worked just for my dad, and then when I got into the union, I worked for a friend of mine on the wrestling team. His dad owned a union company, and he got me an apprenticeship in the carpenters union. So it was really through a friend,
Hmm.
because my dad did smaller jobs, and his health was an issue too later on. So
Okay. What would you say were some lessons that you learned working as a carpenter?
I would say do a great job, show up on time, work as hard as you can while you're there. If you work in the carpenters union, you have to be a good worker, or you just get laid off, and
Hmm.
that's just the way it is. The guys who are most productive, they're the guys that stay the busiest, and so I tried to do that as much as I could, and I really liked carpentry. I still do.
Hmm. You still do like for yourself around the house kind of stuff, or do you do other work for others?
Well, my wife chases me, and sometimes she catches me, and when she does, I'll do stuff around the house. But the last year or so, I've been really focused on teaching and finishing up the book that I wrote on theology.
Okay. And so you mentioned you were in carpentry and then you went back to school because of an experience you had. So if you could describe that, like what made you want to go back to school at that point?
Well, I think it was my experience with faith, and I really wanted to learn more, and that's really why I ended up going back in 1985, 5 years after I graduated from high school. And my passion for my faith really wanted me to, really drove me to get my degree. and my love for my family. I really wanted to do well for my family, and I thought that was going to be the road that I took. But by the time I finished, I had two kids, and I couldn't afford to stay in construction, to go into teaching at that point. So I stayed in construction for a long time.
Hmm.
Another
And
30 years.
okay. And so you were in construction while going to school and getting those degrees.
Yeah, yeah. I was working as a carpenter, and I went nights. And in 5 years, I graduated with a degree in history, religious studies, and had all the educational credits to be a high school teacher in Rhode Island. But I just no, I had to. At that point, I would have had to student teach for a whole semester, which I wouldn't have really gotten anything for, just the credits.
Hmm.
So I didn't end up doing that. I stayed working in the field for another 5 years.
Okay. What was kind of your thought on why you picked like early church history for your one of the majors?
Yeah, I did that in the first major because I really wanted to know what the first Christians believed. Um, I was always intrigued by how the development of the Catholic Church got to where they are, how Protestantism got to where it was, and I just really wanted to know what it was like right after Jesus ascended to heaven. What happened from Acts of the Apostles on to, say, 200 or 300 years into the Council of Nicaea, say, which
Hmm.
was in 325. So that's really I focused on that in the first degree.
And what did
Uh,
you learn from that? Like studying the early church, what were some things that stood out for you?
well, I think the writings are difficult. There are a lot of run-on sentences, so it's very difficult to read the early church fathers, as the Bible can be sometimes difficult to read. But I think what I learned the most was that overall, what I learned was that in the early church there was no real consensus that what happened to you after in life after death. And I learned in the early church they were just fighting some early heresies that had nothing to do with heaven or hell. They really had to do with who the person of Jesus actually was. And was very intrigued with the Council of Nicaea in 325 because that's a big year. And from that year on, I think you still see the Nicene Creed, and well, it's said every week in the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm sure in a lot of other traditions it's said. I've even gone on evangelical websites, and there's the Nicene Creed there. So it's kind of a point in early church history that this is what the church believed, and I was always intrigued by that. How did we
And
get from Acts of the Apostles to Nicaea?
just for people who may not be familiar with the Council of Nicaea, if you could just give like a little bit of a description of what happened at that time.
Okay, so at the Council of Nicaea, there was a dispute over who the actual person of Jesus was, and there was a dispute between a couple of bishops, and at the end of the Council of Nicaea, it was pretty much decided that Jesus was God. He was not just the Son of God,
Hmm.
and it was championed by the Bishop of Alexandria and his assistant Athanasius. They were the they were the two they were the two men on the Catholic side or the Orthodox side that was that won the argument at Nicaea, and that's where the creed comes out of. It comes out of that and the next council after that.
Hmm. And just going back a little bit to the early church, from your studies, how different is the structure of churches today versus the early church? Especially around like disciples, like the early church, around disciples and right after them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the early church they were just house churches, right? They weren't structures. They were more meeting places for Jews that believed in Jesus. that's really who the early church was Jews, until it spread in Acts to the Gentiles. So I think even then it was mostly just, house churches where they would meet and talk about their faith in Jesus as Messiah. And I think that's fascinating to me. And then when they became at odds with the Roman Empire, they were in hiding a lot. So it's just fascinating how the church grew so much under persecution.
Hmm. Yeah, it just seems like today, especially in the free world, at least. I mean, there's other parts of the world where it's not so free for Christians, but um, it just seems like a completely different type of structure, if we can call it that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Even the Roman Catholic Church is something that developed. Originally there were five major dioceses, and with Rome being the first among equals, I guess is the term that's used, and then it
Hmm.
evolved into being the Roman Catholic Church.
So during your time of working as a carpenter, going to school, and then after 5 years, you've gotten the degrees. What was your family life like during that time, where you had to work, and then you went to school, you were married? I don't know if you had children at that time or not, but like the whole dynamic of working and going to school and being at home.
Well, back in the '80s when I went back, I mean, thank God I had a great wife, an understanding wife, and she stayed home. I made pretty good money in construction, enough where she could stay home and take care of the kids. So, I was blessed in that regard. I had like the perfect wife, and um, yeah, so it was tough at times when I had to study and couldn't pay attention to my kids at night, but um, I tried to make up for it on weekends and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But I worked really hard. It was tough to get a degree in 5 years, but so it did take a little bit of toll on my kids when they were young. I think. Hopefully they don't remember, but they were
Yeah.
pretty young.
And then you graduated. What did you do next after that? After you graduated?
When I graduated from Providence College with my undergraduate degree, I was able to get a job at the school as a manager in the construction department. So I came out of the field after 10 years of being a carpenter and a laborer too in there too in the beginning. So that was fascinating. It was a total change, and it was a real opportunity to grow that I'm so thankful for. I was at Providence College as a manager for almost 5 years. I started off as a manager of trades, and I ended up at one point running all the facilities there for a couple of years. And actually, for a while, I was an acting assistant vice president.
Hmm.
Um, so I left there because they kind of shut down the building program they were doing, and I really liked the construction end of it. So I went to work for a contractor.
Okay. In trades as well, in carpentry or something else?
No, I was a manager of projects. First project I did was build a police station in Fall River, Massachusetts, and I was there for 15 and a half years. I was a vice president of pretty much of operations for the company,
Hmm.
and I did that for almost the whole 15 and a half years. It was a short stint. I worked in Boston for a wonderful company. Um, they're a sister company to Suffolk Construction. John Fish, I worked for him. That was an honor. I was CEO of that sister company. I was hired as CEO. That had a couple hundred people at the time,
Okay.
and I did that for 6 months. And the only reason I stopped doing that was because it was a hour and a half ride back and forth, and it was really starting to take a toll on my family, even more than going to night school. So I
Hmm.
went back to work for the firm that I worked for right here locally.
So you were in construction, in like commercial construction.
Yes, it was all commercial construction. And then after
Okay.
being with that firm for 15 and a half years, I started my own firm in 2011 and have been in business since. And actually, still officially in business. I haven't done that much in the last year or so, but I did some consulting last year,
Hmm.
and mostly just finished the book and got ready to teach at Salve Regina, where I teach now as an adjunct professor.
Okay. And just curious about the firm that you started. What was the reason, or why did you want to start it?
Well, I wanted to pursue also a nonprofit, which I started in 2014, and I still run now, besides working as an adjunct instructor at Salve. So
Hmm.
there was other things I wanted to do. I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to do that at some point. But really, I think the big thing was to try to make more money to be able to run a nonprofit and be more in charge of my whole day without the responsibility of, helping to run a major company. So,
Hmm.
and it just took so much time to work with that company. So, yeah, that's why I went off on my own, was time.
Okay. And then did you eventually sell it, or what happened to it?
No, the company's still open now. I just did consulting last year. I haven't closed it officially, for no real reason other than, just want to make sure that this works well and I can continue to sustain a living as an adjunct professor. And I may end up doing some more consulting this year. So it's not
What
officially closed or anything like that.
was this strictly like a consulting company? Is that
No, it was a hot bid general contractor.
okay?
So I would bid municipal projects, mostly schools. Like over a summer, I'd have to do renovations to 4 schools or 2 schools in one district. And then, yeah, it was mostly commercial construction.
Okay.
Good
So
sized projects, not small projects.
yeah. So you have a team, or you have like a contractors that do
Yeah,
the
I
work
had
of the
a
management?
I had both. I had some guys that worked in the field, mostly laboring and carpentry, because that's the thing that I excelled at when I was young. And everything else was subcontracting out because these were good sized jobs. So if I had to go into a school and do renovations to 4 bathrooms in 4 different schools over a summer, I hired subcontractors to do that.
Hmm.
And we usually did the demolition and carpentry ourselves.
Okay. So you have a team behind that company, and not just it's not just like you're just a consultant for others, right?
No, no, we actually do the on site management and do the demolition and carpentry end and subcontract out all the other stuff.
Okay. So while you're doing that, you started a nonprofit and you wanted to write the book. Um, so how did you decide, or how do you figure out like how much time you allocate to one thing versus another thing?
Well, the nonprofit isn't a huge deal. It's mostly family and close friends that get together and do things for inner city families and inner city homeless folks. I mean, it adds up. Like over the since COVID, we've done about over 20,000 lunches for the homeless. We just bagged lunches that we distribute on the street and mostly drop most of them off to homeless shelters in
Hmm.
Providence, Rhode Island. But during the holidays, we do quite a bit at Thanksgiving time and Christmas with gifts and Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners, stuff like that. So it's not a huge undertaking, but it is one that happens every single week, and it is a ministry to the inner city homeless here in Providence.
Hmm.
So as far as the allocating time, I'd say about not it's not a lot of my time a week. I'd say about 10% right now, me personally. And the other people are involved. The families take turns making the lunches every week, and it's a blessing to the people that are actually doing the lunches too. It gives them a chance to be active in their faith.
Yeah.
And really, that's what it's been all about.
Yeah. So you in school, you studied theology, early church, biblical studies, and so on. How did you happen to uh, like write the book, or what was the reasoning behind why you wanted to write a book such as you did?
Okay, so I finished the theology degree, and I also taught adult confirmation in the Roman Catholic Church, and was always intrigued with what happens after death. We really didn't get a lot of that in school, even in the graduate level. It just isn't talked about that much. And when I was into the second degree, I had a very good professor in Old Testament, and he was very good about answering questions. And was always intrigued about the afterlife in the Old Testament, and I used to ask him a lot of questions about it. And it eventually led me to read more about it. And I read some great books on the afterlife. And when it came time to do a thesis, you had to pick something. So I found the term Savior of the World and hell interesting, because in both Catholic and Protestant tradition, especially early on in both traditions, the notion of eternal torment for everyone who isn't saved is there. And how does that square with that Jesus is Savior of the world? So the title of my thesis was Hell and the Savior of the World. And because thesis went on for a while, my advisor, my first advisor, was busy doing things, so I just kept writing. And when I was done, it was quite a bit longer than it had to be. I want to say almost double or something like that. It was quite a bit longer. And I said, really, this is the makings of a book. So I added another 4 or 5 chapters, trying to finish off what I really thought, and changed the name of it, because it was really, what I came up with was that hell is just a bad word. So that's where I came up with the name of the book.
Hmm. So in your studies there, if you could elaborate a little bit more on why you came to that conclusion, or how you came to that conclusion.
That there's that Jesus never talked about hell. Really didn't have anything to do with my classes at PC. It had to do with my independent study for the thesis. So I guess in that regard, it had to do with my studies at PC, because to finish off, to get a Master's of Art degree in biblical studies, you need this long thesis, this long paper. And so that's what got me interested in it, and I just kept working at it and trying to figure out how those two things squared. If Jesus is Savior of the world, what's this thing about eternal punishment?
Hmm.
So that's how I got into it.
What are some views that people have on hell? I know there's a book like Four Views on Hell. Is it just the four views? Are there more than that?
Yeah, actually, I read that book, and I think I quoted from the author of that. That's interesting that you should say that. His definition, the person that's in there that takes the notion of eternal conscious torment. His name is Denny Burke, and I used his definition in my book as one that I was trying to show. Did Scripture really show that that's what hell is? That there is a place like that?
Hmm.
And the other thing I used as a definition of hell was the Catechism of the Catholic Church. What did it have? What did it have to say in 1993 when it published its catechism? What did it say? What's the definition of hell? And I came up with, I think, 8 or 10 points in the beginning of the book, and I tried to prove out what Jesus actually did. He actually say there was a place like these two definitions? And my conclusion was that hell really is a bad word for it, and my assertion really has to do with translation of a couple of words.
Hmm.
And then actually, did the words that Jesus said otherwise show that there is a place of eternal torment?
So what could you name, like, what are the different views on hell?
Well, there's annihilationism, which is where people think that there's not really a hell, or if there is a hell, it's a limited duration, that it ends with the annihilation of all the wicked in the world or that have ever lived. There's universal salvation, which is two, and I can't remember the fourth one in that book. That there's a purgatory, I believe, is the other one.
Hmm. And like purgatory, actually, that was one I was going to ask you about. Um, my limited knowledge of what Catholics believe, or maybe it's just a perception on my part, as far as purgatory, that purgatory is a place where people go to that have sinned, but maybe the sins were not that great, and they get purified or something, and come out of it. Is that what that is,
Yeah.
or what is?
Are you a practicing Christian?
Yes,
Okay. So, like what denomination, just roughly?
I would. I guess I would call myself non-denominational.
Okay. So, in the Catholic Church, purgatory is really, it's a place for people that have been baptized Catholic, and they go there if they die with venial sins, which are not sins that totally alienate you from the love of God. I'm not an expert on purgatory at all. You really don't hear much about purgatory anymore in the Catholic Church. You do sometimes at the end of Mass, they'll say, for the souls in purgatory, and they pray for the souls in purgatory. But the belief is that Catholics that have been baptized, that are in decent grace with God, that have some sins, they go to this place as kind of like, if you look at the Baltimore Catechism, which is before the catechism that we have now, that was published in 1993 under John Paul II. Purgatory is a place like a hospital. You go in there and you're kind of rehabilitated in a way, and after you're done, you can enter heaven at some point.
Hmm. So,
So,
doing the research that you've done for your book and so on, what have you drawn a conclusion in terms of, is there a hell? Is there no hell? Or what is hell?
well, I think I came up with was just that hell is a bad word, and I'm really not just trying to push the title. It's a translation. It's an English word, and it takes three different words in the Bible. It's actually four, but three that are really associated more with Jesus for the purpose of the book, we'll say. In the Old Testament, there's a place called Sheol, and it's if you look at it and you analyze all the places that the word Sheol is used, it's just the place where everyone goes where they die. There's really no punishment mentioned in the Old Testament. Not even once. There's no punishment that there's no place where the wicked go to be punished by any means. They just go to this place called Sheol. But if you look at the first production Bibles, both Catholic and Protestant, the word hell appears often in the Old Testament, which is odd because Sheol isn't a place of punishment. But we all know hell as the place where everyone goes that's wicked for all eternity to be tormented by fire. Yet in the earliest Bibles, like the King James Version and the Douay Rheims Version, in the Old Testament, the word Sheol is translated as hell. And there's another word, Hades or Hades. It's a Greek word, and that's the word that when they translated the Bible from Hebrew to Greek, they used Hades in place of Sheol, the place where everyone goes where they die. It's mentioned 10 times in the New Testament, and only one time where there's a mention of being punished, of any punishment by fire.
Hmm.
And then the last word, if this is getting boring, you got to tell me.
No, no, no. I'm interested.
Okay. The
Yeah.
last word is a word called Yerna. It's a Greek version of a Hebrew word, which is for the valley of Ben Hinnom. It's a valley south and west of the city of Jerusalem, and it's a specific valley where specific things happened in the Old Testament, and there's a very big part of the book that talks about that. So the title of the book being Hell is a Bad Word is that translators were affected by theology.
Mm-hmm.
the theology that there is a place in the afterlife for everyone that is wicked, a place for them to go, and they summarized it as this word hell. When generally, if you look at the Bible, not generally, if you look at the Bible, it's really not clear at all that it's a place of there is a place of eternal conscious torment forever. So that four views of hell is the argument that Denny Burke took up in that is really the argument that is the definition that I really take the biggest issue with. I do take an issue with the Catholic Church's definition of hell also, but yeah, it's the eternal nature of punishment in the afterlife. Is God, does God punish eternally, right? Everyone who's not in the church. So if you're an evangelical, and a lot of evangelical churches now, they're not all the same. My daughter goes to an evangelical church, and I love my daughter. They don't really talk about hell much, and I'm glad about that. They really focus on the love of God, and I think that's wonderful. So it's really not for me, a Catholic or Protestant thing. It's does God punish eternally if you're not in the church?
Mm-hmm.
Is there like this gated community of humans that God just chooses to go to heaven? And that's what the book takes issue with. That Jesus is the Savior of the world. He's not just the Savior of some. But again, one of the views in that book is universal salvation, and I don't really take up that view as a definite, because I think it really takes away from free will.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't think that if you can say everyone's going to be saved, then you basically know what people want in the afterlife. That they'll definitely want to be with God, and I don't know that we can know that.
Yeah. What There's an example, I think it's in the New Testament referring to the Old Testament, with talking about Abraham and Lazarus, or Lazarus being in Abraham's bosom, and
Yeah,
then there was a rich man that's like on the other side.
yeah.
What what's your interpretation of that?
Well, that's interesting. There's a whole chapter on that in the book, and that's the only place in the whole Bible where the word Hades, which again, if you take Sheol and concede that Sheol is really Hades, the place where everyone goes when they die,
Mm-hmm.
then it's the only place in the whole Bible where the word Hades has any suffering. And you're absolutely right. It's the rich man and Lazarus. It's in Luke's Gospel, chapter 16. And my assertion in the book is that it's a parable, and it's really more about the living. It really has more to say about our lives and the living than it does about exactly what happens in the afterlife. But there's definitely torment by fire in the parable. It's a parable. We have to keep that in mind. And there's a lot of things about the story that make it pretty clear that it is a parable. So the lesson, I think, is really more for the living and how we treat the poor.
But
And
some
that, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So, some would argue that it's not a parable because most parables names are not mentioned in parables, and in this case, names are mentioned, like
Yeah,
Lazarus and yeah.
yeah, I've heard that. Uh, uh, Abraham's name is mentioned. Lazarus' name is mentioned. Lazarus is a word that means "my God helps," um, which is interesting. So I'm not sure that that's a reason to say that it's not a parable. I mean, there's so many things about it that I think are a parable, like just our notions of heaven and hell, right? Traditionally, it's hell is down and heaven is up, and there's a chasm in the earth. Well, they're not below the earth; it's a chasm in the earth. The rich man knows Abraham by name. Well, how would he know him? He's in the first century. Abraham died around the year 2000. So how would he know him? Did he have a name tag on? There's so many things about it and he asked to send Lazarus over with a water on the tip of his finger to cool my tongue. Why would he ask for just a drip of water? I think it's a story Jesus is trying to tell. and it's consistent with Luke's gospel on that the outcast and the poor are what Jesus came for, and that's pretty consistent in Luke's gospel. So chapter 4 of the book is you could really find that there, Jerry, and it probably give a lot of answers to what you're asking.
Hmm. Also, when it talks about Jesus going down into, I'm not sure what language was used, like the pit, or going down into the earth for 3 days, um, to free the saints, or whatever, however it's stated there. I don't have the exact kind of statement there. But have you looked into that passage as well and kind of what it's referring to?
I have. It's interesting that I read a book on it, and there's a lot of theology around it, and it was a whole area that I didn't really take on in the book. But there's a lot of interpretations of what happened there. It doesn't say he's in hell. It says he, I forget the exact words, descended to the dead. That's how we refer to it in the creed. But also in John, this is from John's gospel. It says a host of captives was set free.
Right.
So, yeah, it's funny, interesting that in Hades in the book of Revelation is emptied, and cast into the lake of fire, which is the last verse, which, I don't really try to say exactly what that is, because I think that all of the book of Revelation is it's a poem, and it's been interpreted a ton of different ways by a ton of different people, many who try to take it literally in a lot of ways. And I'm certainly not an expert on the book of Revelation, but the lake of fire is just one metaphor that's used for justice in the afterlife, I think, or just the final justice. Because
Right.
the amount of times that metaphor is used in the Bible, right? Some things that have been interpreted as hell, right? It's the lake of fire, but also the valley of Ben Hinnom, which is Gehenna, which is the biggest one in the New Testament that's still translated as hell, Gehenna.
Hmm.
And that's a valley. So we have a lake, we have a valley, we have a furnace, we have being locked out of a party, just thrown into the fire, not specifically a furnace, going down the wide road, right? There's metaphor after metaphor for something, some sort of justice that I'm not willing to say I have the wisdom to know what it is. But the book is really about the love of God, and that does God dispose of people in eternal conscious torment who have never met him, who never even had the opportunity to meet him.
Yeah.
Some people have never heard of the name of Jesus. Some that have heard it in a way that is so perverted from who actually Jesus was, it makes sense to not believe in him. So I would say, even though the word hell is on the cover, the book is really about the love of God and the fact that we can't know his mind,
Yeah.
and that there is these metaphors that we have to deal with, but they don't equal out eternal conscious torment for most people in the afterlife.
Did you grow up a Christian or Catholic?
I did, yeah. I grew up a Catholic.
Did your parents ever kind of threaten you with hell?
No, I wouldn't say that. Not at all. I wouldn't say they threatened me with hell. I think that
Well, not.
baptism, infant baptism was a big thing.
Mhm.
You had to baptize your kid right away, because if you didn't, the kid could end up in something that was called limbo, or just hell, which is a layer of hell, I guess. It's some, theology that has nothing to do with the Bible or anything Jesus said, from what I can see. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I'd say that when I was younger, the whole not being baptized thing was something that Catholics heard, that if you weren't baptized, that you could go to hell.
No, the reason why I'm asking, like for me, I grew up in a Christian family, but not that they were like these like outward threats kind of a thing, but it's like, well, you should do the right thing, because if you don't, you will go to hell, or things like that.
Yeah,
Like in some ways, hell was being used as a stick to become Christian, right?
yeah,
Like A lot of
I
people
agree.
are, yeah, a lot of people are kind of told that, well, if you don't become a Christian, you're going to go to hell. And some people may convert or may become Christian just because of that. But then, is their heart really in the right place? Or are they just trying to escape some kind of punishment? And they're not, you could call them not true Christians or not Christians at heart. They just want to escape something, some potential punishment.
Yeah. No, I think that
Yeah.
definitely happens. And I don't. The book is also isn't about the fact that that I think there's no justice in the afterlife. That all these metaphors that Jesus used mean nothing. I think they do mean something. I just think coming to the conclusion that it's an eternal conscious torment against the will of the person that's there. Now, a lot of things have changed, and they've said, well, now it's self-exclusion. A definitive state of self-exclusion is what the church says. Well, that's not the typical definition of hell, and actually it contradicts some of the other things I think in the definition. Um, Self-exclusion to me isn't hell. That's free will. And I talk about that in kind of the end of the book. C.S. Lewis had a very interesting perspective. He said that um, the gates of hell or the doors of hell are locked from the inside. That
Hmm.
anyone who ends up in eternal torment is there because that's where they want to be. And that may very well be true. I don't know that it's not true, and it certainly is consistent with free will, right? Why would God force anyone to be with Him? But
Right.
that's not the typical definition of hell. Self-exclusion, free will, uh, isn't the definition that I'm really taking issue with.
Hmm.
The notion that
Yeah, my,
man
my point
loses
was
his
more
free
so
will.
like, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
The notion that man loses his free will in the afterlife is something that I've never understood. Why would God take away that free will in the afterlife after refining or cleansing, which is often what fire is used as a metaphor for, as for refining or cleansing?
Yeah. Yeah, no, the point that I was trying to make was more so for people. I think, and I don't know, I'm not God, so I don't know what God really, really, truly wants at heart. I mean, we have general knowledge, but I would think that God would want like a pure heart, somebody who wants to follow Him because they want to, not because they want to escape something, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're absolutely right.
So kind of going back to a little bit more about you in a way. Um,
Okay.
when you went into the schooling and went into theology and so on, like what motivated you to go in that line of work or line of schooling?
Just really my love for God. Excuse me. I apologize. Really, my love for God is what got me interested in theology and wanting to go back to school. I thought maybe I could end up being a teacher again when I was running my own business. I said, geez, once things slow down and, I could maybe go back to teaching. So that's really what I wanted to do, was to try to teach.
Okay.
I was thinking more high school, but I've been blessed with the opportunity to teach in college, at least on an adjunct basis for now.
Hmm. And like even the whole notion of teaching, where do you feel like that's coming from?
I would say just from Jesus. I'm really interested in teaching about God and salvation,
Hmm.
not necessarily from hell, but more from sin and separation from God, which I think is really what Jesus saves us from.
Hmm. And in terms of like finding your calling or your purpose, do you feel like you found your purpose, or do you feel like you're still? It's like something that you continuously look for, or you do things, but like, what's your view on purpose and calling?
Actually, for me personally, it's this book. and the message that God's a loving God. The class that I teach at Salve Regina is a world religion class, and I spend a lot of time on the other religions because there's a lot of other people in the world that are trying their best with what they have, with what they've been taught. I mean, there's 1.1 billion Hindus, there's a half a billion Buddhists, there's over 2 billion Muslims who, in fact, believe that Jesus was a great prophet, and honor his mom with a whole chapter, a whole surah in the Quran. So,
Hmm. And like, especially for you and knowing other religions and knowing a little bit about the other religions, why do you feel like Christianity is the belief that you've chosen?
I think it really has everything to do with Jesus of Nazareth and what I read in the New Testament, and uh, the notion that God, right, would come to earth in order to save his creation, and he did so himself through his son slash himself, because we believe in a Trinitarian God in Christianity. So give me a God who wants to sacrifice himself for his creatures, to demonstrate self-giving love and to recreate his creation. That's everything for me. So the love of Jesus, and um, that he shows by his cross, and the notion of resurrection from the dead, and the possibility for new life for everyone, is just a wonderful thing. I think compared to the other religions, it's it's the it's the best, I think, and all the other religions do have traces of wonderful things. I think one of the things that is really important to me is that I think Christianity at times tends to vilify
Hmm.
people that are not Christian. Especially when it comes to Muslims, that's become a pretty prevalent thing in some notions of Christianity, that the Muslims are the enemy, and I just don't feel that way.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that people
Like
see
so,
them as the enemy?
right.
Well, I think it has to do with the doctrine of hell, that God has just chosen a small amount of people for salvation, and that ones that are not for Him or against Him. And also, there's obviously some of the radical things that some Muslims do, um, is a big part of why people think that it's good versus evil.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Um, what what would you want like other people to know, like just people who are listening to this? What else would you want them to know about you or about the book?
Um, I think the book is something that has to be um, looked at with the Bible next to you, and with an open mind, to start your study on hell. Um, not not with a defective premise. I think David Bentley Hart used that term, defective premise. That your starting point is that everyone that's not Christian goes to hell. If you start from the fact that there's a God who loves his creation, who sent his son, or came himself to rescue his creation, not just a gated community that's going to go to heaven. And there are verses that are used to support that. I would say that if you read the book without a defective premise, starting with God's love rather than that there is such a place as hell, read it with an open mind, you might come to the conclusion that hell is the wrong word to use. It's the wrong theology for the New Testament.
Hmm. Um, anything else you want to add to that? Anything else you want to share?
About the book, excuse me, I would say, no, nothing I can think of right off the top of my head.
Okay.
It's a very detailed book. It goes into all the verses, or a lot of the verses, and the words that Jesus actually spoke himself. After it establishes that the Old Testament makes no mention of the afterlife and burning in the afterlife, and after it shows in chapter 2 about how we came to the word hell throughout history, um, then you get into the words of Jesus, and it just doesn't add up to eternal conscious torment.
Hmm. Um, when it comes to the Bible itself, and it's more so maybe for people who don't really understand Christianity or don't know how it came about, like the Bible specifically, uh, could you describe on how the Bible was put together?
Sure. Well, I guess we can talk about the Old Testament first.
Hmm.
There are different authors at different times in history. The books were collected and put together. The Old Testament books that we have in all the Bibles are accepted by the Jews and Roman Catholicism, and in the Orthodox Church there are some additional books that have been accepted as being divinely inspired. And then when you get to the New Testament, there's four Gospels, and they're written by four different writers. Um, there's a bunch of letters from Paul, and Peter is in there, and John. And then there's finally the Book of Revelation. There's also Acts of the Apostles, which is like a history of the New Testament. I'm sorry, the early church history. So it's a list of letters and Gospels that have been put together um, by the church, and the church has come to believe that that's the revelation of God that's been revealed by God.
Was it in AD 90, or was it in the Council of Nicaea when they actually like decided this is the canon of the Bible?
I don't have that one off the top of my head. That's a good question. But some of the list of books go all the way back to, if I remember right, it's either Ignatius or Irenaeus. There there's a list that comes up that's almost a complete New Testament canon, which is fascinating. That's like the second century. But I
Hmm.
think you're right. I don't think it was actually codified until it could be Nicaea. You might be right. I don't have that one off the top of my head.
Okay. And what about the books of the Apocrypha? Like as far as Protestants, I believe they don't believe in like that the Apocrypha is an inspired portion of the Bible, and as far as Catholics, I thought that that was part of the Catholic Bible, but I'm not sure.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Interesting thing is, in the first issues of the King James Bible, they were included in the Bible, but they weren't in with the main body that is still today. They were listed
Hmm.
at the end of the New Testament between the Old Testament and New Testament, kind of there as not maybe necessarily totally inspired, but still there as in with the one book, right?
Hmm.
As far as with Catholics, they're there, and I think it's 6 or 7 books. I forget off the top of my head, but the Orthodox, I think, actually have 2 or 3 more
Hmm.
that are in there also that are considered apocryphal.
Yeah. What would you say to like an individual Christian who's, uh, I mean, there's like there's people who kind of follow other people and they just believe what other people say or how they translate the Bible. Like early on, people couldn't read, so they had to trust that whoever could read is reading what's there and explaining it that way.
Yeah,
Now, today, we all can read, and with technology, we can really go to the source and figure
yeah,
out what was the actual definition of each word
yeah,
to study for ourselves. Like, what would be your either advice or suggestion for each individual person who is a Christian or wants to be a Christian as far as studying the Bible? How should they do that?
well, I mean, I think you need a good study guide, and it has to be something that's scholarly, maybe that's not um, totally skewed towards a certain denomination or a certain mindset about heaven and hell. Um, but it's really interesting. This is a fact, Jerry, right? The first production Bible in the Roman Catholic Church, the word hell appears 109 times.
Hmm.
Two of the newest versions, the word hell doesn't appear at all. It's not in there at all. Hades is translated as Hades, or Hades is translated as Hades. And then the word for Gehenna, the valley on the outskirts of Jerusalem, Yerna, uh, which is translated as Gehenna. So in those two Bibles, the word hell doesn't even exist anymore. So if it's just that for evidence that I need, then the book's a slam dunk. Hell is a bad word. But let's talk about the earliest Protestant production Bible, which is the King James Version, which is still very popular today. I think it's 54 or 55 times the word hell still appears in the King James Bible. But if you look at the New International Version or the English Revised Version or the Revised Standard Version, it's usually in there. I would say that if I remember right, the New International Version, it's in there 13 times.
Hmm.
Hades is translated as either Hades or the netherworld or something like that. They don't translate Hades to hell. It's just Gehenna, if I remember right. But they don't. There's no hell in the Old Testament in the New International Version, or I think in the English Standard Version. Those are Protestant Bibles.
Hmm.
So there's something about translation,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I just think, I mean, we we can't really judge the motive of a person or whatever. People who were translating, they were probably doing their best they could. Um,
I
but
think
it's
you're right.
interest. Yeah, it's interesting. Like
I think you're
today,
right.
yeah. So today with the technology and everything else that we can go back, and we had like the sea scrolls that just were discovered not too. I mean, maybe it's like 30, 40 years now, but relatively not too long ago compared to um, other things that were used to verify the Bible, what was in certain books and so on.
Yeah,
So it's interesting how new information confirms kind of the old information.
yeah. In some instances, it certainly does. I think regarding the word hell, I think that it's pretty clear that theology affected the translation of it because why would hell be used for a translation for Sheol when there's no mention in the Old Testament of fire in the afterlife or punishment in the afterlife? Not at
Hmm.
all. The only place there's a trace of it is in the book of Daniel, and that's addressed numerous times in the book. And it doesn't talk about torment by fire. It talks about a resurrection. Um, it doesn't talk about the afterlife, punishment in the afterlife. It just talks, there's a resurrection of
Yeah.
contempt.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, translation is, I'm not saying it's the fault of the translators, but it's the theology of the day that affected the translation, is what I'm saying. And that's not, this book isn't about like looking back at early Christians and criticizing them that, it's a malicious intent to, you know, deceive the masses so they can keep them coming to church and, paying to come to church and keep them in power. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the theology went wrong, and that's the result. That's where we got the word hell and the notion of eternal conscious torment. I mean, I
Hmm.
look at there's some churches that believe that all Hindus and all Muslims uh, and all any pagan religion that's not Christian or a certain type of Christian is going to eternal conscious torment, even if they've never heard the name of Jesus. To me, that's just not. It's not consistent with the love of God. It's not consistent with what Jesus said He came for.
Hmm.
He came for the outcast. He came to bring the lost sheep back, not to torment them by fire if they'd ever heard of Him.
Yeah, I think maybe that's because if a person is presented with two options, A and B, and they're not aware of any other options, and option A is out, then all you have left is option B. So what I'm trying to say
That's a
is,
good way to put it.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is like we as Christians, I believe Jesus is the way, the only way to heaven, right?
Yeah,
But that doesn't necessarily mean that um, everything else is, everybody else is going to hell basically because of it, right?
yeah,
Like maybe there is a different view on eternal separation or whatever that looks like. That
yeah,
maybe there's that third option. So maybe the people are not going to heaven, they're not going to hell, but they're going somewhere or not, or getting
yeah.
eliminated or whatever it is.
It, isn't it possible that the metaphor of fire is used for restoration? I mean, if you there's a whole there's a chapter in the book. It's called "Fire and Forever," and I think you'd really like it regarding um, the metaphor of fire. But uh, Jesus refers to John the
Well,
Baptist as preparing the way, and he uses Malachi to do that. And the one who's he's preparing the way for, the Lord says, is coming with a refiner's fire, with a launderer's soap, and that's who Jesus is. So, isn't it possible that purgatory is a refining, a metaphor for refining in the afterlife for anyone who needs refining, and that still Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life that he says he is. No one comes unto the Father except by me, can still certainly be true, but it doesn't have to be necessarily in this life, is what I think.
yeah,
And I know there's a
I'm not.
verse in Hebrews that people often use to say that it's appointed unto man once to die and then to judgment. And somehow
Mhm.
that means that, um, you know, the judgment is eternal conscious torment. No, it means that we live our life and we're judged by our life. And it certainly can mean that in the afterlife, or it certainly can mean to me that in the afterlife, people that haven't heard get some sort of chance to accept the way, the truth, and the life.
I mean, like personally, I'm not sure if I would believe that or if I believe that, but I think I keep the door open for maybe there is basically that person ceases to exist after whatever justice is done, then that person just ceases to exist. I
Yeah,
mean, I
that's
don't.
annihilationism. Yeah, that's in that book you mentioned, The Four Views of Hell. That's one of them.
Mhm.
Um, it's kind of summarized as annihilationism, if I'm saying that right. There's another word they use for it in that book, but that's what they believe. Some people believe that there's a punishment, and then after the punishment, it's annihilationism. It's a
Mhm.
person is annihilated. Um, I don't
And,
know. I
and
think there's a couple of verses in Scripture that point that way, but I don't think the vast majority of Scripture kind of bears that out.
yeah, and again, I'm definitely not a theologian. I'm just kind of a lay person, just learning kind of on my own, basically.
Yeah,
So to me, I'm just kind of using logic, and I know logic can be misused, or like if you don't have enough information, you can draw the wrong conclusion. Um, but yeah, just definitely interesting. The whole topic is interesting, the afterlife and so on. Yeah,
it's fascinating, right?
yeah,
I mean, we end up going to funerals and people don't know what to say to each other because people are worried that their loved one didn't make it, and um, I'm just not so sure it's that clear cut, you know.
yeah, yeah. Definitely, definitely would be nice to have a little bit more clarity around it, if at all possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'd like the book. I think that the book doesn't come up with clarity. It just tries to refute the idea that we can know that God punishes people eternally by fire. It tries to prove that out by showing that it's been mistranslated and that the word doesn't even appear in Catholic Bibles anymore because they were using the wrong word.
Yeah.
The wrong.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. So usually we're pretty much at the end of the episode here. If you have anything else you'd like to share, or at least share where people can get the book or find you.
It's just on Amazon, And if they go to michaelbarry.com, there's a website and there's trailers to the chapters and to the introduction. So there's a book trailer with a QR code above where it says introduction if you buy the hardcover or the paperback. And there's a trailer for it. And if they just want to see what the book's about, you can just go to michaelbarry.com and watch the book trailer, and then there's a tab at the top that says chapters, and you can watch all the chapter trailers. And I think there's a young lady who helped me. She just did a wonderful job with putting it to music and the images that I asked her to use to find good images like those. And she found great music. She did a wonderful job. And they all last about, Jerry, about a minute and a half at most. I think there's one that actually goes longer. Most of them are under a minute and a half.
Yeah, they're. I actually watched some of them. They're very well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They make you
So,
think, right? They make
oh
you
yeah,
think about the mercy of God, don't they?
yeah, yeah.
Good.
So one last question for you: what does the world need more of today?
The world needs more of Jesus of Nazareth and the mercy that he showed. You know, the world needs more of love in God and love of neighbor. You know, the Shema says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." And you, Israel, should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And then Jesus always added Leviticus to that, saying from Deuteronomy that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. If we focused on that instead of on who's in and who's out, and leave the divine justice to God, I think the world would be a much better place. We'd be dropping less bombs on Palestine. You know, we'd be dropping less bombs on anywhere. Anyway, Yemen right now, we're doing that. So I'm a big proponent of the Prince of Peace. You
Hmm.
know, the world would be a much better place if we cared about the poor and the downcast and the outcast. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me here and for sharing your story and a
yeah.
little bit about your book. Thank you.
Well, you know, it was an honor talking to you. I really appreciate your time, and you're a gentleman. And yeah, thank you so much. I'm grateful.
All right. Thank you.